from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Whoever then relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But he who does them and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." The Gospel of the Lord. I remember my first exam at university. I was doing psychology, and it was a textbook about this thick. And it was called People in Context. I'll never forget it because I was completely unprepared for it. And so, like most students, I decided to learn in sections. I looked at the size of the book, and I tried to determine which sections were most likely to come up in the exam, and I focused on those sections. It was a nerve-wracking experience, and I passed. But I will never forget that night sitting up in my room, trying to divide this massive book into its important sections and its unimportant sections. Why am I telling you this? Well, because very often as Christians, we tend to do the same thing with the Bible. We look at this massive book and we think to ourselves, well, what are the most important sections here? What don't I have to know? What don't I have to read? So obviously there's the four Gospels, which I gather most Christians should know. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's the writings of Paul. There's the book of Revelations. And most Christians are content to stay within that field, the New Testament. The Old Testament is complicated, and the word old just makes it sound antiquated. It doesn't apply to us anymore. It's a Jewish thing. But that's not what Jesus says today. Because Jesus uses a specific phrase in the gospel today. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets. That interesting little phrase actually means, do not think that I have come to abolish the Old Testament. Because the Old Testament consists of the law and the prophets. That is exactly what it is. And Jesus is saying to us, it's all still valid. Every single part of the Jewish scriptures. Everything contained in it. He goes on to say, I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Giving them an added importance. Jesus is saying, if you want to understand me, for us Christians, if you want to understand the New Testament, if you want to really understand the Gospels, if you want to really get to where the letters of Paul are trying to drive you, then you've got to understand, you've got to have some understanding, some reference to the Old Testament. Because I have come to fulfill that, Jesus says. That's what I've come to do, to fulfill the Old Testament, the law and the prophets. And what was the purpose of the law and the prophets? Well, in a nutshell, the purpose of the law and the prophets was to bring us closer to God. God's fallen creation, humanity turned away. The law and the prophets existed to restore the broken relationship that humanity suffered from with God. In a nutshell. And Jesus, the Son of God, the face of God, Jesus comes to fulfill that. The culmination of God's revelation, God's salvific action towards humanity. So we can't learn the Bible by sections. We can't adjudicate certain sections as more important than others. Every book in the Bible is important because every book, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, has a specific purpose and a specific meaning in relationship to the person of Jesus Christ. And we are Christians. We are the people of Jesus Christ, those who follow him, and those who are called to keep his commandments. And the commandments he talks about here, again at the culmination of this gospel, is the spirit of the law and the prophets. A spirit that he, Jesus Christ himself, embodied in his earthly ministry. And he goes on in tomorrow's gospel to explain a little bit more about what he means, and we'll deal with that tomorrow. But my dear brothers and sisters, a challenge for each and every one of you today. I'm sure many of us are accustomed to picking up our Bible. Many of us are accustomed to looking at it in sections, and most of us are probably accustomed to sticking only with the New Testament. A challenge for us today, let us consider the Old Testament. Let us look from the book of Genesis all the way to the book of Daniel. I'm not asking you to read it all, no. But there are many summaries available on the internet. There are many books dealing with the Old Testament subjects. There are many ways to find out the meaning and the message in each Old Testament book, from Genesis to Daniel. And I encourage each and every one of us, a challenge from Christ's gospel this morning, to engage with that Old Testament. To work with it. And see where it leads us. Hopefully, to a deeper understanding of the person of Jesus Christ. To a greater understanding of his mission, his purpose, and so to a much deeper appreciation of our own salvation.